Good evening. I will call this meeting of the February 18th, 2020 Planning Commission to order. Madam Secretary, can we have the roll?
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Chair McCauley.
Here.
Vice Chair Aldridge.
Here.
Commissioners Beaumont.
Here.
Fortney.
Here.
Alan Johnson.
Here.
Brett Johnson. Nikolai. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Commissioner Aldridge, Vice Chair Aldridge, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Of course. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, Judy. Next item on the agenda is communications. Director Brierley, do we have any communications?
We do not.
Okay. The item after that is approval of the agenda. Do I have any proposed amendments to the agenda as presented? And if not, can I have a motion for approval by Beaumont, a second by Johnson? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Now is the time for business from the floor. This is a time for any member of the audience to address the commission on an issue that is not on tonight's agenda, but that is within the Planning Commission's subject matter. And open, this is a public hearing. Is there any member of the public who would like to address the commission on this item? Please come forward. When you do, state your name for the record, please. Hold on. Let me find the podium. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. My name's Teresa Stout. I'm a resident here. I just have a quick question. Who is the builder on the project? Has that remained the same? It says no items changed, but is that still ongoing? And is there a, no, I think that would be it, actually.
Ms. Baderi.
The developer is the same as original. The developer's intention is to sell the individual phases of the project to different builders as they come along to purchase the phases. So at this point, there are several builders who have actually inquired about purchasing phases and coming in for approval of house plans.
So the lots are established, but there's no house plans that have been approved for any of those lots, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Did that answer your question?
It does, but it kind of adds into a couple others because I see that there are a couple areas set aside for schools. And that land is currently owned by two different owners now, Roberts Ranch and Brighton Landing, correct? And how will that change as a bunch of different builders come into the picture?
So there is a school site, or rather, I think it would technically be called two school sites. One in the Brighton Landing project, where the arrow is pointing on the right side there, and the second one directly adjoining it in the Roberts Ranch project, slightly larger. The original intention on the school district's part was elementary and middle school for those two sites. And so the developers are required to approach the school district about the purchase of those sites, and that is still the plan.
So if whoever comes in with house plans would still have the same obligations to pay fees for the construction?
Yes, they would.
Okay. See someone else who would like to address the commission?
Haddock's Consulting Engineers and the project civil engineer representing the applicant. I just wanted to add that the intent as the project is sold to builders, they will be buying the respective phase of the development to build the houses, but the school site is still in control by the master developer. And regardless of who the owner is, the project is constrained by the conditions of approval and this development agreement that would travel with whoever the successor or assigned owner is to any individual phase of the development.
Yeah, since you're the developer, a representative of the developer, and we've been into this project for 3 years now, at a time of historic low interest rates and economic vitality, and we have no builders that are willing to build yet or able to, what's the problem? I mean, this seems to be a perfect time to build, and yet we haven't been able to see any plans or anything else. Is there
Well,
a
the
reason?
plans, the house plans have not come through because like we've explained through the entitlement process, Vacaville is an expensive place to develop. And as home builders are considering building in Vacaville, they don't do like they used to in the early 2000s. And you've got these massive builders that are building thousands of homes throughout the valley. Everyone is leaner and meaner, and every project purchase goes through corporate reviews, and they're much more selective, and it's competitive. And the reason that we're asking for the extension on the timeline is to account for the fact that it has been difficult and the developer has had to go out. The original intent was not to go out and do all the mass grading and do the roadway improvements. The original intent was to sell paper lots to a home builder, but they weren't willing to buy that. Their preference would be to build finished lots, or to buy finished lots where the original developer puts all the streets in, develops all the pads, and all they have to do is come in and build homes. And so in order to sell a project, we're competing against all of the communities in Central California that are in the same condition. And so it's much more competitive, and it's much more difficult to attract builders to come to Vacaville than we originally had hoped. But the infrastructure that has been put in is basically a very expensive marketing exercise on the development, and we are now getting the attention and getting home builders that you should see out there this year. But in the time that it's taken to get to that point, we've lost time in the development agreement, and the timeline in the original development agreement was already a tight timeline to be able to build out the development. So the extension is basically allowing us to start the clock on the home builders over again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to address the commission? And please let us know your name as you come to the podium.
Thank you for the gentle reminder, Mr. Robert McCauley. I'm aware of that, but thank you. My name is Roberto Valdez. I'm a longtime resident, as you know. I'm here today, and by the way, just want to say my greetings to you, the commission, and your staff, as well as the public. And I'm surprised that also already two concerns before me, but that's good. That's what we're supposed to be. We're a democracy. We should talk about this project. Anyway, let me get to the point. The reason I'm here is because I read in today's paper the reporter, Vacaville reporter, in the front page and page 4 about the fact that there is some sort of the developer is intends to proceed with the construction and improvements in the well site and extension. I'm quoting utilities and environmental mitigation procedures affecting the boring owl. As you know, the boring owl is a federally protected species. It is not only a protected species, and I'm here to remind you of that, but it's also one that the proposed habitat conservation plan has targeted as one of the 37 or so species that are vital to this Solano County and through this whole region. And it so happens that that area that that this project is in, and this is why I take a very critical view, because of my involvement with environmental issues and projects and other projects that I've seen proceed at a pretty fast pace as the city expands to the eastern side of Vacaville and other areas. But the fact is that there are known boring sites, areas there that have been identified by the proposed habitat conservation plan. I refer you to Figure 422, not only actual but also potential. And I should say that if you recall, the fact is that there are other, just to give you how critical that area can be, as far as that particular species, there's also the Green Valley golf course, I'm sure you know, that the city is allowing to be developed there. Well, that has been found with that area by the car lots. The car dealers, there have been boring owls sighted, actual film, and it was brought to the attention of the city by, I believe, with the state, that the city allowed this particular car to move its cars, and they were literally running over the boring owls habitat, and they tend to come to their original site, where they make their burrows. Anyway, that's what they call the boring owl, because it makes holes in the ground, and other species take advantage. So you're not only affecting that species, but others. The other one that I think I need to remind you, which I haven't heard anything, is about the Swainson hog. If there's a mitigation, why aren't you talking about the Swainson hog tonight? Is it something that the city refuses to
And Ms.
recognize,
Bell,
or what?
If I can for a sec, I'll keep you plenty of time, but I want to ask staff, are there any changes in the mitigation obligations that would occur with this time extension?
And again,
or they
that's been
remain as
verified.
is?
No changes at all to the mitigation requirements for the
Okay.
project.
So whatever exists for mitigation requirements right now continues into the future with the time extension?
That's correct.
Okay. Did that answer the question you had, sir?
Well, yes and no, because you're telling me what you're planning to do and allowing to be done over there. But I will tell you that the Napa Solano Audubon Society is watching that very closely, not only because they are concerned about the impact of those species that they fully value and protect, and try to balance with all the developments going in this area. But the fact is that there are there's other residents, including myself, who have seen Swainson hogs, boring owls in that area. So, you need to be cognizant of that. And if you ever start any construction there, I can guarantee you that we'll be watching, not only the Napa Solano Audubon Society, but the residents there. And so you need to be very careful with what you do and how you do it, because that is, and by the way, you're also going into primary agriculture land. I know this is something that the city has undertaken, but you're not alone on this, and you won't be alone on this. Thank you.
And I see the city attorney wishes to interject.
So I don't support it.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in and just remind the commission that the agenda talks about a very specific item tonight, so want to keep that in mind.
I know, but
Yes.
you're allowing the disagreements. Thank you.
Is there any other member of the audience who would like to come and address the planning commission on this item? See no one coming forward, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and ask for commission comments. Do I have any comments, or are we ready to move to an action?
Make a motion.
Okay, so it looks like I have Commissioner Fortney would like to take an action.
Yes, I'd like to recommend that the city council approve the request to extend the development agreement term by 5 years.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Johnson is seconded. We have a motion to second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? It passes unanimously. Mr. Byerly, what is the disposition?
The commission's recommendation is a recommendation to the city council, and that is tentatively scheduled for city council consideration at the, let me look up the date. At the February 25th city council? Or is it March 10th city council? Yeah, March 10th city council.
And thank you for the members of the public who came down and spoke on this item. Our next item is number 8A, the Land Use and Development Code update. This is a business item, informational only, no action is required, though the public will have an opportunity to speak. Mr. Baderi, are you making the presentation?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So this item is just a status report and schedule update for the Planning Commission as we move along on the code update. So the last 2 months, you've had reports bringing to you significant sections of the draft code update, and we wanted to just let you know we're getting close to the last preliminary draft section and give you a sense of what will be coming down the line here soon. So at this point, I wanted to advise the commission and the public, anyone interested, that following the Planning Commission's review of these draft sections, what we do is go back and talk to the consultants, go back through the comments we've received from yourselves, any members of the public who've talked to us about that particular section, modify, try to address comments that were made, and place a post-Planning Commission version of that preliminary set of sections on the project website. So at this point, we have placed 4 of those revised sections on the project website. The topics addressed are shown on the screen here, the land use regulations, so the types of uses allowed in each zone district, the development standards that apply to non-residential zoning, your commercial and industrial zoning areas, overlay districts that are used throughout the city, the parking performance standards and sign issues. And then last month you saw the resource protection, so tree protection, things of that nature, and subdivision regulations come before you. So those have all been looked at. We've attempted to address comments or place corrections in and clarifications where we heard the need for that. The next section that you'll be seeing in March is the administration and permit procedures section. So a little more procedural and substantive in terms of the way we look at projects, how we review projects through the approval process, and what the procedures for all stages of permitting are. So that will be at your March Planning Commission meeting. And following that, we will move on to compiling all of those preliminary draft sections into a complete version of the draft code. We're going to ask you to take a look at it again, and we'll go back and revisit some of the main topics that came up, see if we've addressed them adequately. We'll be talking to folks who've submitted comments to us, asking them to really look at those areas of interest that they've had in the code update to make sure we've caught their comment correctly, addressed an issue that they brought up, and things of that nature. So thinking about these, yeah.
Commissioner Beaumont, go ahead.
Fred, are those changes, are they going to be highlighted in that so that we can make sure we know where they're at?
They are, the version that's placed on the website, they are not highlighted. That's a very good point. What we do have highlighted are areas where there is still uncertainty and discussion going on, so that we can highlight for folks, well, here's an area where we're still working on or attempting to work on a correction or a change to address a comment. We did not, because there were quite a few comments. It was just quite a confusing document when you look at all of the edited comments and suggestions.
Okay, thank you.
So with regard to schedule, again, your March 17 meeting, we'll present the preliminary draft of the administration and permit procedures sections for you. Before the Planning Commission meeting, like we've been doing, we'll set some time aside to allow people to come in and just talk to the staff and the consultant team directly, any direct questions about contents of that particular section. At the April 21st Planning Commission meeting, we will hope to come back to you with a list of any of those sort of final issues that we think we either really need some additional direction from the Planning Commission, or we've come up with a new approach and want to run that by you before we put it into a final draft. In early May is when the consultant team believes they'll be able to then compile that full version of the draft code for you. And we would expect to be to you May 19 with our first look at that full code. What I mentioned in the staff report is that that'll be, of course, a large document to review. We have time to come back and do another meeting with the Planning Commission. We don't have to. It just depends maybe on how well we've answered questions, how comfortable you are with the sections you see and read. But we'll kind of take a look at that as we get a little closer to the May meeting time. Any questions on schedule? And then I thought I'd just use this opportunity. I know I missed the December meeting where the consultants presented items to you. And I wanted to circle back and just let you know of a few of the items in the sections that we reviewed in December and January that we're continuing to kind of look at and put those on the screen, let you provide us, again, any additional thoughts or comments you had. I know there was some discussion of flexibility in parking requirements and having the ability for an applicant to ask the decision maker, whether that's the Director of Community Development, the Planning Commission, or the City Council, to take a look at varying standard kind of boilerplate parking requirements when there seems to be justification for doing so. So we have written into the initial draft a few methods by which someone could ask that, but I wanted to bring that question up again and just let you know that we're welcoming any other thoughts or ideas. There are sections in the current draft that address the potential for parking changes to the standard ratios based on shared use of a parking lot by multiple users, and users who sometimes have different operating hours and might be able to use one smaller lot rather than duplicate parking requirements. Different ratios for uses that are able to take advantage of close or nearby transit facilities. Use of, allowing consideration of special operational conditions that some uses might have that might justify, in their case, a variation in a standard parking requirement. And ability of an applicant to suggest a traffic management plan. Again, sometimes you have users that they may have a large number of employees, but if they're spread across different work shifts, they may not need a number of parking spaces based on the number of employees, but instead on the way that they operate their business. So we've got a few suggestions in there in the code, and I wanted to bring that up for you and just let you know that we're welcoming any additional thoughts and ideas. Second one is to take a look at bike parking. So we did look at that comment, and we are still working that through to see if, we've allowed for enough flexibility in making sure that any requirement for bike parking is appropriate to the type of use that we're looking at and maybe its location. And I think that was brought up at maybe the December meeting, that there were some situations where you might not want to always require the standard template requirement on something like that. Temporary signs, the issue of enforcement, that was brought up, I think at the last, or at possibly the December meeting again also. We are looking there. And then those last two, I wanted to just note this is circling all the way back to the use regulations, the very first preliminary draft section we looked at, uses in the neighborhood commercial zone. So we had a few that were flagged during that process just to have us take a look at for ensuring neighborhood compatibility. And that was really related to drive-through uses, service stations, car washes, things of that nature, where sometimes you could be in pretty close proximity to residential homes. And so we're taking a look at that just to make sure we've either, allowed the proper procedure for permitting something like that, or identified uses that maybe shouldn't be in certain locations. And the last one, I wanted to just add on there, kind of a new area that we're wanting to take a look at in our industrial and employment center zonings, trying to research the techniques through zoning regulations that cities are using to provide or to facilitate the development of biotechnology uses. This has been one of the desirable land uses in the business parks that have been targeted before, and so we want to look at that and make sure we're taking a look at opportunities to work those standards into the code if we can find those. So anyway, I'd welcome any comments there or on any other sections that might be on your mind.
When the administrative section comes up, I remember when the Farmstead project went through, and there were some comments from the audience about what had to be considered, and well, how did that project ever get considered completed or was declared complete in the first place, since that sets a couple of standards and timelines.
Yeah.
So I think we might want to reach out to some of those groups that have had more reactive or more negative input with some of our procedures before, whether it's with the
Yeah.
Old Rocky Antenna or the Farmstead groups or others, and make sure they know, since administrative procedures have a lot to do with what you can say and when you can say it, that we reach out to them and let them know that this is coming up. That'd be my only input. Do other
Thank you.
commissioners have
Thank
anything
you.
they would like to ask or say to Fred at the moment?
I'm good.
Okay, this is a business item, so the public does have an opportunity to speak, that we're taking no action. Is any member of the public interested in coming and addressing the commission on this item? I see someone speaking. If you just let us know your name when you come to the microphone, and I will remember to turn it on this time.
I'm Tony Smith, and I live out in Browns Valley. I was just a question in regards to the resource protection part and all these planning commissions. I was wondering, I've talked to the city council about it before, native plants, putting them in instead of plants from Asia and other places. So native plants would adhere to the soil better, save water, bring back wildlife, bees, so to speak, and it wouldn't be a big stretch for the city, I wouldn't think, to start landscaping with more native plant material as part of the resource protections kind of a thing. So I think that would be a good start right there for some of the landscaping. I didn't see any designs or anything for this new project, but that should be implemented in there, I would think. That'd be a good thing.
Mr. Baderi, is this something where we would address that in the land use and development codes, in the public works standards for public improvements? Where would this be addressed?
Actually, it could be an appropriate item to address in both of those areas that you just mentioned. So in the code, we have in the resource protection standards, tree protection, tree mitigation and replacement, habitat and wildlife protection, and then sometimes the native plant material really falls into that category of providing the right habitat for native species of wildlife. In the public works standards, and that's something we could bring up with that department, because they are responsible for the maintenance of all the public landscape spaces, say boulevard backup landscaping and other areas, it could well be a very appropriate change that we suggest go into there as well. So I think, yeah.
We talked a little bit earlier about it, yeah. You know, that'd be a good thing because Vacaville could sort of set a standard there for other cities, saving water, you know. It's kind of a good PR thing in a way too. Save water, bring back some habitat, you know, and they're going to landscape anyway, so you might as well start with native plants. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. It'd be good for erosion control, and plants would climatize the soil better too because they're native to this area. So the Parks Department, the city, Public Works could, you know, review the plans when they come in and say we want to go with native plants. That would be a good thing. Davis could probably help you on that too, UC Davis. So like we were talking earlier, for an example, in Yolo County, just tomatoes, one crop, okay? If they don't have bees for that crop, that's $10 million, okay, in losses, one crop. So you can imagine what that could be like, devastating to our economy and everything else. So anyway, thank you. Just thought I'd mention that, all right?
Thanks for speaking. Is there anybody else who would like to speak?
Who else? Hi, Teresa Stout again. Just a question on accessory dwelling units. At the last city council meeting, it was voted unanimously for some new ordinances based on state assembly bills and one Senate bill. How will that affect code? Because some of the items that have changed are number of units, where you can place a unit, how far away from the fence it now has to be, and how is that all going to fit into the new codes?
So those were adopted by City Council as an amendment to the land use code. So those codes will be incorporated into this new version of the land use and development code. So we pulled that out of this overall project because it had a little more urgency. The state had adopted regulations and cities really needed to get their codes updated quickly. So one, we wanted to just push ahead of this overall update.
Thank you. Anyone else like to come forward and speak? Seeing no one, will go ahead and close the item. There is no action on this, so I believe that concludes item 8A. Item 9 is the status report on development and major projects, current planning and then advanced planning. So 9A is current planning. Is this Mr. Baderi or Mr. Byerly?
I will give current planning, and then Fred will give advanced planning. So just a couple things to report on in current planning. We approved the Vandengate house plans. That's Vandengate's on Vanden Road, just north of Southtown. And that's a 43 lot subdivision, and we did approve the house plans. It has one single story and two story models. And we also approved the Henner Tank Lines building that's on Crocker Drive, adjacent to the Vacaville Travel Center. That's a truck terminal for an existing business in Vacaville, so we're happy to see them remain in Vacaville. And that's all I've got from current planning, and turn it over to Fred.
Barton, what is the requirement to have the plans come before the planning commission versus the staff approve them?
Yeah, so with our recent residential design guideline changes, we established objective standards for all of those, for what they have to do. And so if they meet all those standards, then it's done at staff's level. If they want to request any exceptions to those standards, that's when it comes to the planning commission.
So in advanced planning, in addition to the code update that we talked about earlier, so right now there is a lot of work going on with the downtown specific plan and the downtown connectivity and streetscape plan. The connectivity and streetscape plan is scheduled for City Council next week on the 25th. You reviewed it at your special meeting in earlier this month. If adopted, we will be submitting that one to Caltrans, who was the granting agency for the funding on that plan by the end of the month. The next stage is really to take that streetscape plan and incorporate that into the overall work going on for the downtown specific plan. And that will be really ramping up over the course of the summer. We'll really be looking at land use, at zoning requirements. So some of the issues we're talking about with the code update and developing specific zoning standards for the downtown plan. And all the other factors, development standards, design standards, approval processes for land uses that go through in the downtown. Let's see, at your next meeting, the meeting in March, you'd expect to see the copy of our annual report on the status of the general plan. So this is required by the state of California. We have to submit that by April each year. So we'll be bringing that to both the commission and the council in March to report on implementation of the general plan and how that's been going over the last year. And let's see, Green Tree. So the Green Tree project plods along. We are currently completing the scoping for the traffic study. That's really one of the more complex components of the analysis that will have to be done. Working with the developer team on completing their draft specific plan for submittal and a few other technical studies that have to go into the environmental review. I think drainage is one of those. We talked about the ADU ordinance earlier, so that work is nearly complete on getting that ordinance put into place. And I think there will be work going on over the next several months on researching the effectiveness or success or not success of cannabis ordinances around the state, as the city council has requested a revisit and report on additional information on how the implementation of those laws is going throughout the state. I think that's what we got going.
Director Brierly, this is the director's report on council action and tentative schedule.
Okay, so at the February 11th City Council meeting, the council approved the Alamo Mixed Use Project, which you had heard last month. And as we mentioned, they also approved the accessory dwelling unit ordinance changes. At the February 25th meeting, next week, they will hear the downtown plan, which you heard last meeting. And then on March 10th, they will hear the Roberts Ranch Development Agreement. And then we're also planning on taking forward an item on the planned growth ordinance. The state's passed a number of housing laws, and one of those housing laws puts a temporary moratorium on local restrictions on the local caps on the number of residential building permits that can be issued in any 1 year, which would be our planned growth ordinance. So we're going to be taking forward a resolution just to formalize what the state has required of cities. At your next meeting, we expect to have a senior housing project at Harbison and Ulatis. We may have a commercial project on Leisuretowne Road at Elmira Road. And the annual status of the general plan report and the code update on the administrative procedure. So you'll have a good full meeting in March. And that is St. Patrick's Day, so wear green. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Barley. Do any of the commissioners have closing comments they'd like to make under item number 11?
No.
Seeing none, then we are, well, at least for my tenure on the commission as a record, done in 40 minutes. Meeting is adjourned. Good night, Vacaville.